One small design choice that I make in almost every class that I create is this. I'll default properties and methods to private. Not protected, not public, but private. Obviously, you need to have at least one method that's going to be public so you can actually use the class, but for everything else, I typically will make them private. So you can kind of think of public methods and even public properties of a class as an API to your class or an entry point into your class. Protected methods are also the same. They're also an entry point into your class, although they are limited a little bit more than public classes since they can only be used by anyone extending your class. But once something becomes a part of your class's API, people are going to depend on it. And then you, as a developer, are responsible for maintaining those entry points into your class. And the more entry points that you have into your class, typically the harder it is going to be to maintain that class. So let's take a look at a fairly basic example I've put together here. We have a class called image resizer. It has one public method called resize, and then two protected methods. Resize takes a path to an image file. It then gets the new dimensions from the dimensions protected method, the quality from the quality protected method, and then returns an array containing information on the newly resized image. So nothing too crazy going on here. Obviously it's just an example of something we can do. It doesn't actually resize the image. So we have our image resizer class, and since those two methods are protected, someone else could extend your image resizer and then override those two methods. So we have a new class here called thumbnail resizer that extends the image resizer class, and it overrides the dimensions and the quality methods to return different values. Now let's imagine that I need to refactor the base class. So we go back to the image resizer, and I'm not changing the public method at all, but I'm going to change one of the protected methods. So let's change dimensions, and let's call this max width and max height instead. Now if we go back to the thumbnail resizer, we can see that the mismatch is visible. Now this might not introduce any problems. This is just kind of to illustrate the problem that we have here. But now we have overridden protected method that returns a different value than the base class. So we have to remember that protected methods are still an API or an entry point into your class. Once someone depends on them, you are responsible for them. And I don't know where I heard this. I definitely didn't come up with this quote myself, but this is just ingrained in my head now. Public methods, and often protected ones too, are like having children. Once you have them, you are responsible for them for the rest of their lives. So what can we do to avoid this situation? And this is what I do typically with any class that I'm creating. Instead of leaving these doors open and leaving these as protected, I will change these to private. Now, I hear from other developers sometimes, and it's a totally valid point. I don't want to say that this is the only way to do it. I like to call these guidelines because I don't treat them as rules. There's always going to be exceptions to this. But if you mark them private, then someone extending your class cannot use them. So if we go back here, you can no longer override these methods because they are private on the base class. So, and I hear that argument a lot. You're going to want to extend this at some point, so why not just leave them protected so that someone can extend them when they want to? Now, one analogy I've used on this in the past, and it may not be the best analogy, but let's say in your house, instead of locking all your doors, you're always going to leave them open. So leaving the doors open in your house is similar to leaving public or protected methods. And you want to leave them open just in case your friends want to come over. In my house, I typically will always lock the doors and leave them closed by default. And then if someone wants to come over, they can knock on the door. And that's kind of what I imagine this with the code. If I leave these private or locked, but someone wants to make a subclass and use these methods, they can make a pull request on my class and change these to protected or public. And that pull request is the knock on the door. They're asking, hey, can we make these open now so that we can use them? And one benefit of that is in the pull request, it now forces a discussion. So you may have some reasons, and some very good reasons, why these need to be private, and they may have some good reasons of why they need to be protected. And I'm not sure what the right answer is going to be in the specific use cases, but at least it starts that discussion and gets the ball rolling, and then the best design can come out of that discussion. Another thing I hear against private methods is if you mark a method private, it makes it either impossible or very tricky to add unit tests on them. And to that, I say if you feel the need that you need to write unit tests for your private methods directly, that's often a signal that the logic in those private methods might be screaming out to be a class of their own, and then have a whole test class on that new class itself. So the private methods should be providing support to the behavior of the public method, and you can write unit tests on that public method. The private methods do not need unit tests, and if they do, take a step back and think about maybe that logic should be a class of its own. So in closing, what I want to say is private by default is not about restriction. It is about clarity. And you can always open that door later. But once you've opened that, if you start with that door open, closing it later is going to be a lot harder. And again, these are just my opinions and what I like to call my guidelines. I don't like to call them rules because there's always going to be exceptions to these, and everyone's use case is different. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you like to leave your methods and properties private by default? Do you have other thoughts on this? I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much.